So, Dr. Ornish, very nice to meet you digitally. And thank you very much for your kindness and your time to do this interview. I know you did a lot of effort to try to change things in your agenda so you could meet us in person at the conference next week, but it wasn't possible, and I really hope we can manage to get you there at the next conference in 2 years. But for today, we'll do it in this way.
Well, I would love to. I love being in the Netherlands, and particularly in Amsterdam, one of my favorite places in the world, so I would welcome that opportunity.
Oh, that's great. So, just to give you some background, people who are listening, about 400 people, most of them are in healthcare, either mental health care or in hospitals, and some of them are in research or as managers in the care, or either students or families, patients, so it's quite a wide audience. And the theme of the conference is healthcare in crisis. We feel our healthcare in Holland is a little bit in crisis. And we've chosen a sign out of the Chinese alphabet, which is made out of 2 signs. One of them is danger and the other one is opportunity. And we thought that your work might give us some opportunity instead of danger for our healthcare system.
Well, I think that's a great idea because, as you know, change is hard, whether it's changing lifestyle, whether it's changing behavior, whether it's changing the way we view the world, our mental health. But if you're in enough pain, then the idea of change becomes more appealing. It's kind of like people go, wow, that's going to be hard to do, but boy, I'm hurting so badly, I'm willing to try pretty much anything. And then when they make these changes, the pain goes away, particularly when they change their lifestyle, their chest pain goes away, their angina improves, their joints improve, but also the deeper pain, the depression scores are cut in half in just a few months, in some ways working better than antidepressants like SSRIs. They often look back on the pain as a blessing in disguise, saying things like, having a heart attack was the best thing that ever happened to me. And somebody might say, what, are you crazy? And they say, no, that's what it took to get my attention to begin making these changes that have transformed my life into such a degree that I might not have done otherwise, that in that sense it was really a blessing. I mean, in fact, that's how I got interested in doing this work in my own life when I was 19 and became profoundly and suicidally depressed. That was my doorway. But unfortunately, as doctors and health professionals, we're not often trained to view pain as a doorway or as an opportunity, but rather as something to be killed or numbed or bypassed, literally or figuratively, as quickly as possible. And so I really appreciate the chance to be here today to share our experience of how people can use suffering as a doorway for transforming their lives for the better, the crisis as an opportunity.
Thank you. So, major disease as a blessing instead of a curse. And I'm sure the audience would be interested to hear a little bit more what you just said about your own experience when you were 19 and you were having this depression, and how did you get out of it yourself, and how did it inform your life and your science afterwards?
Well, it's a blessing, but I would never go up to somebody who's suffering and say, hey, what a great blessing you're having. A proper response would be a nice Hawaiian punch or something. But for me, it certainly was, having survived it. I mean, I came about as close to committing suicide as a person can do without actually doing it. I was 19 years old. I was a freshman in college at a small university in Texas called Rice University, which I didn't know at the time, but wasn't in their course catalog, but it had the highest suicide rate of any school per capita in the U.S. And I soon learned why. I wanted to be a doctor, so I was taking pre-medical classes, and one of the classes that you have to take in the United States is organic chemistry. And my organic chemistry professor at the time, I was convinced had fled Nazi Germany and come to Texas rather than Argentina to be my professor. And he said on the first day of class, I am going to weed you out. This is a weed out course. And look to the left and look to the right, and one of you won't be here at the end of the semester. Now, this was a school where half the student body either graduated first or second in their high school classes, and everybody was used to making, straight A's. So they put everybody under a bell curve, and so now, a third of the class was making C's and D's and F's. And so I began to worry that I wouldn't do well, and the more I began to worry, the harder it became to study, and the harder it became to study, the more I began to worry. It became a vicious cycle. And so I got to a point where I literally couldn't sleep for a week straight, and that kind of sleep deprivation itself will make you a little crazy, as you know. It's when they torture prisoners, they don't let them sleep for a week straight. And I remember sitting in chemistry class and saying, you know what? why don't I just kill myself? And then I'll be done with all this pain. Then I won't have to worry. You know, it's like, why did I think of that before? It's like, because I'm stupid. And the combination, I really felt like I was a fraud, that I'd somehow managed to fool the admissions committee that I was smart, but now that I was in a school with a bunch of really smart people, it was just a matter of time before they figured out what a mistake they'd made in letting me in. And in addition to the feeling like I was a fraud and stupid, I had a bona fide spiritual vision, which is that nothing can bring lasting happiness. And I knew at a very deep level that even if I got all the things that, you know, our culture tells us will bring happiness, you know, if I got rich and famous and married a beautiful woman and, you know, all those kinds of things, then I'd be happy. I knew that wasn't the case. And so the combination of feeling like I was never going to amount to anything because I was stupid, and even if I did, it wouldn't matter anyway, it was profoundly depressing. So that's when I decided I was just going to do myself in. And I was all set to do that. I was going to get drunk and run my car into the side of a bridge, and then people would just think I got drunk and they wouldn't know the real reason. But then I got so run down from being up for a week straight that I got a really bad case of infectious mononucleosis, where I didn't even have the strength to get out of bed. And by then my parents got wind that all was not well with their son. They came and saw what a wreck I was. And I went home to Dallas, and my plan was to recuperate and get strong enough to kill myself, as crazy as that sounds. So meanwhile, my older sister, this was back in 1971, 72, had been kind of a child of the 60s, and she got involved with yoga and began studying with an ecumenical spiritual teacher named Swami Satchidananda. And it really turned her life around. So my parents decided to have a cocktail party for the Swami when he came to Dallas. This was, again, in 1971, 72, which was a pretty weird, even today in Dallas, that would be weird, but
yes,
it was especially
also
weird.
in Holland.
So he came into our living room and he gave a little lecture. And you know, there's an old saying that when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and that was certainly true for me. So he walks in our front door wearing these orange saffron robes, long gray beard, typical archetypal Swami. And he started by saying, "Nothing can bring you lasting happiness," which I'd already figured out, but I was ready to do myself in, and he was glowing, you know, and joyful. And I thought, what am I missing here? So he went on to say what probably sounds like a New Age cliche, but it really turned my life around, which is that nothing can bring you lasting happiness, but we have that already. And that the goal of all spiritual practices, whatever, once you get past all of the rituals and things that people fight and kill each other over, is that the basis of all spiritual practices is that they quiet down our mind and body enough to experience more of an inner sense of peace and joy and well-being. One that didn't come because we got something we thought was going to make us happy, but rather that's our natural state, is to be peaceful and happy. And in one of the perhaps the great ironies of life, we end up running after all these things thinking that they're going to make us happy. If only I could get more money, more power, more beauty, more accomplishment, whatever that blank happens to be. If only I could get more blank, then I'd be happy. Then I wouldn't feel so alone. Then people would love me and respect me, and then everything would be great. And so what I learned is that, you know, in the process of running after all these things, we disturb our own inner sense of peace and joy and well-being that we could have if we just stopped doing that. And the Swami liked to make puns. He said later in life, somebody said, "What are you, a Hindu?" He'd say, "No, I'm an undu," you know. And so all these techniques, whether it's healthy eating, meditation, yoga, you know, love and support, really help us to simply stop disturbing what's already there. Now that may sound like semantics, you know, but it's really everything. Because if you think that you have to get your health and your peace and your joy and your well-being from outside you, then everybody who has something that you think you need has power over you, has control over you. And if you don't get it, then you're not going to be happy. And so the stakes go up and the stresses go up, because it's not just winning or losing or getting something, it's being a winner or a loser. And people think winners are loved and you feel good, and losers are lonely and isolated and depressed. And so the stakes go up, the stresses go up, and then we over time, those chronic stresses can cause us to both engage in behaviors that are more likely to make us healthy. People are much more likely to smoke and overeat and drink too much and work too hard and abuse substances when they're depressed. I've had patients say things to me like, "I've got 20 friends in this pack of cigarettes and they're always there for me and nobody else is. You're going to take away my 20 friends? What are you going to give me?" Or food fills that void, or fat coats my nerves and numbs the pain, or alcohol or other drugs numb the pain, or those kinds of things.
Hearing you speak like this, it really resonates what you're saying, but I almost feel like I've suddenly the whole scenery changed, and I'm in a new age workshop weekend. No, I'm joking. But so I would almost forget that you're a professor of medicine, a medical doctor, and you have been doing research that really put things upside down in the medical world. In the 90s, you showed that heart disease can be reversed by changing diet and doing exercise and yoga. And that was something nobody would even believe at that time. And still, I think some people have difficulty believing it, even though you have been doing follow-up studies and have proved it again and again, not only with heart disease, also with prostate cancer. And later you showed in other journals like PNAS and JAMA and Lancet Oncology, Urology, all big medical journals, you showed that these effects are real and they can be measured and they have a huge impact on our lives in the case of finance, health, etc. So can you explain how should we put this together? You are like, one time you're speaking about spirituality and about Swami and about these things, and at the same time you're doing strong medical research in the most prestigious journals. So you're both?
They are both, actually. We're using these very high-tech, expensive, state-of-the-art scientific measures to prove the power of these very simple, low-tech, low-cost, and often ancient interventions. And my work is really about to address the underlying cause. You know, sometimes when I lecture, I'll show a cartoon of doctors busily mopping up the floor around a sink that's overflowing, but nobody's turning off the faucet. And the faucet is, to a large degree, the lifestyle choices that we make each day. What we eat, how we respond to stress, how much exercise we get, and how much love and support we get. You know, eat well, stress less, move more, love more. Now, that may sound kind of new age, that may sound kind of touchy-feely. I used to get very defensive when people would say things like what you just said and say, oh, no, look at the hard science, and here's our changes in quantitative coronary arteriography and radionuclide ventriculography and cardiac positron emission tomography and blah, blah, blah. And then one day I said, you know what? This is touchy-feely. That's what makes it work. We are touchy-feely creatures. We're creatures of community. That's how we've survived as a species all these years. I wrote a book back in 1998 called Love and Survival that reviewed what were then hundreds and now thousands of studies showing that people who are lonely and depressed and isolated are 3 to 10 times more likely to get sick and die prematurely than those who have a sense of love and connection and community. In part, as I mentioned earlier, because you're more likely to abuse yourself, smoke, overeat, drink too much, work too hard, and so on, but also through mechanisms that we don't fully understand. And to me, part of the value of science is to raise awareness, because to me, awareness is always the first step in healing. And if we're really talking about addressing the underlying causes, it's not enough to give people information. I mean, if information were enough, nobody would smoke. It's not like you tell somebody, you tell a patient, oh, I want you to quit smoking. Did you know it's bad for you? They go, I didn't know that. I'll quit today. It's like everybody knows. It's on every package of cigarettes. So you have to say, why do people smoke? And why do they overeat and drink too much and work too hard and abuse themselves? And that's where you inevitably get into the psychosocial, the emotional, and even the spiritual dimensions of health and illness. And by the way, when we work at that level, then we find that people are much more likely to make and maintain lifestyle choices that are life-enhancing than that are self-destructive. And what we've been able to document in the most esoteric ways, you know, we're about to publish a study on angiogenesis, for example. As you mentioned, we've shown changes in telomeres and gene expression. We can actually, your body has this amazing ability in most cases to begin healing itself if you simply stop doing what's causing the problem, which to a large degree are these lifestyle choices that we make each day.
Yes. So you just mentioned how difficult it can be for people to change their lifestyle, even though we all know it's important for us not to smoke and to exercise and healthy eating. And in the literature there have been so many debates on which factors are important to make these lasting behavioral changes. For instance, to make it, people make small steps and having good experiences and making registration of their behavior. So in your experience from the last years, which factors would you say are most influential, most important to bring lasting changes?
Well, it's a really important question because everything I was trained to do turned out to be wrong. I was trained in medical school to try to scare people into change. I mean, the whole concept of even risk factor reduction and prevention, and in many ways, is fear-based. You know, put that cigarette down, you're going to get lung cancer, or put that cheeseburger down, you're going to get a heart attack, or whatever. And what I've learned I've been doing this now for almost 40 years. I'm 96, I look pretty good, don't you think? But no. Is that fear is not a sustainable motivator in anything, whether it's in heart disease, whether it's in politics, whether it's in global warming. It's part of the reason why, when Al Gore did An Inconvenient Truth, everybody's, trying to drive smaller cars and putting in fluorescent light bulbs. And that lasted, a little while, and people stopped thinking about it because fear is not a sustainable motivator. We all know we're going to die. The mortality rate is still 100%, it's 1 per person, but it's not something most people think about all the time. And so efforts to try to motivate people to change their behavior, or even to take their medications based on fear, are not sustainable. I mean, for someone, let's say, who's had a heart attack, they'll do pretty much anything their doctor tells them for like 6 weeks. And then they go back to their old behaviors. And the doctors that I work with say, come on, I can't even get my patients to eat less red meat. You're going to have them be vegetarian and meditate and exercise and do yoga and love more. How in the world can people do that? I mean, the studies were showing actually that most people are not even taking their statin drugs like Lipitor. The idea is that taking a pill is easy, everybody will do it. Changing lifestyle, that's way too hard. People can't do that. But the pharma company's own data show that 2/3 of the people who are prescribed statin drugs like Lipitor and Zocor and Mevacor and Pravachol and so on aren't taking them just 6 months to a year after they're prescribed, even if someone else is paying for them and even if they don't have side effects. You might say, well, why aren't they if they're beneficial, particularly for people with heart disease? And the reason is they're fear-based. I mean, if you really kind of cut to the chase, it's like, take this pill, this Lipitor, for example. It's not going to make you feel better. Hopefully it won't make you feel worse to prevent something really awful like a heart attack or stroke from happening maybe years down the road that you don't want to think about, so people stop taking it. But on the other hand, when people make lifestyle choices, we're getting 85 to 90% adherence to a very intensive reversing heart disease program in all the almost 60 sites now that we've trained with thousands and thousands of patients. Whereas it's much harder to do that than to take a pill. So how can that be? Well, the reason is that the pill doesn't make you feel better, but the lifestyle choices do. And because these underlying biological mechanisms are so dynamic, most people find that they feel so much better so quickly when they make these changes, to the degree they make them, that it reframes the reason for making these changes from fear of dying, which is not sustainable, to joy of living, which is. Their chest pain goes away. They think more clearly. Their blood flow to the brain improves. The latest studies are showing that you can actually grow so many new brain neurons through a process called neuroplasticity or neurogenesis in just 2 or 3 months, that your brain can get measurably bigger, particularly the parts of your brain you want to get bigger, like the hippocampus that controls memory, which often people start to forget where they put their keys and so on, or what was that person's name as they get older. You can regenerate a lot of that. Those are really the key things that make lifestyle choices sustainable. So I would just say that this way of practicing medicine is not only good for the patients, it's especially good for those of us who do this work, and I would encourage you to give it a try.
Okay, I'm sure we all do after hearing all of what you said, so thank you very much, and looking forward to seeing you in 2 years at our conference.
Thank you so much, a great pleasure.